Welcome to the Queer Spirituality Podcast. I'm your host, Julian Crosson-Hill. This podcast is about an idea. It's the radical idea that queerness is a gift and that the divine celebrates it rather than merely accepts it. We'll explore the special role that queer people are meant to play in the coming spiritual awakening. Through the lives and stories of queer people, we'll explore the many ways of approaching the divine and how the sacred reveals itself in everyday actions. Most of all, this is a podcast about love. It's about the love of the universe, it's about love between people, and it's about the love a community can share with one another. Thank you for joining me. Hello and welcome to this episode of the Queer Spirituality Podcast. I'm your host, Julian Crosson-Hill, and with me today, I have Morpheus Ravenna. Morpheus Ravenna is a gender-fluid sorcerer, artist, and writer residing in the East Bay area of California. She is a dedicant of the Morrigan with a practice rooted in animism, folk magic, and Celtic polytheism. An initiate of the Anderson Fairy tradition of witchcraft, she has practiced devotional polytheism and the magical arts for over 25 years. She is the author of The Book of the Great Queen and the Magic of the Otherworld, and a priest and co-founder of the Coru Cathubodua Priesthood. Morpheus makes her living as a tattoo artist, and she creates devotional artworks and sorceress crafts in a variety of media. She also practices medieval armored combat and is very fond of spears. Morpheus can be reached through her website at bansheehearts.com, and that link will be down below in the podcast description, so definitely go check out her website. Morpheus, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here.
It's great to have you here. So I always like to start out with a simple question of, what does queer spirituality mean to you?
Yeah, that's hard to pin down, but I suppose what I would say is that queer spirituality to me is any spirituality that is unbound by, from kind of conventions that seek to limit us in terms of our gendered experiences or our non-gendered experiences and kind of how we walk in the world. I know that sounds really vague, but like as a gender fluid queer person, like my experience of figuring that out for myself has been one of shedding limitations and boundaries. And so I think of queerness as a way of being in the world that is comfortable transgressing the borders of things that are kind of social conventions like to keep apart.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I suppose that translates into what I think of as queer spirituality.
Yeah, I love that, because I think even as a cisgender gay man, there's a lot of shedding things that deal with like toxic masculinity and what it means to be male in our society. And so I can definitely relate to that, that idea of sort of letting go of those limits. That's really, really interesting. And of course, when Charles Harrington was on the show, we talked a lot about the liminality and the edges and being in that other space. And it feels very like similar to what a lot of gender fluid people experience as they sort of sort out what does gender mean to me, right? Because it's kind of going beyond what society says gender is and gender roles are.
Yeah. You mentioned liminality, and that's very central in my experience of both gender and spiritual practice.
Yeah.
And I think it's something that comes up a lot in a lot of different spiritual traditions, like around, witchcraft and spirit practitioners and, all these kinds of ways of working that often involve kind of walking between worlds and stepping into other realities and spiritual realms. Hedge riding, and there's a lot of these practices that come back to this idea of crossing borders and boundaries and walking between worlds.
Yeah, definitely. And liminality, it's just such a powerful concept. Of course, I follow Hecate myself, which is very
Ah,
much a
okay.
goddess of the liminal spaces. So
Yeah, and
liminality is quite a
Crossroads.
yeah, yeah. It transitions and the underworld, all of it. So
Yeah,
very cool. Um, so your bio mentions that you're a Celtic polytheist. I'm a
yeah.
diehard polytheist myself. I also have known to dabble with Odin and other deities. So
Okay.
I'm curious though, and you've mentioned the Anderson Fairy tradition. So how did you find your spiritual path? Like, what was your journey like?
Yeah. So I started out as, I guess, sort of instinctively discovering witchcraft. Like it was one of those things where as an adolescent I started just experiencing things and would, be out in the woods and like chanting to the moon and not really know what I was doing, but just, you know, something was and the first kind of organized stuff that I discovered around that was through witchcraft, classes and things at pagan occult bookstores, and I got into a a more formal training situation through a coven rooted in the Anderson Fairy tradition. Um, yeah, and so that was my early background, and that coven um has a long-standing relationship with the Morrigan, who is an Irish goddess. um it's just as part of that coven's kind of suite of ritual and devotional practices, we would do rituals honoring the Morrigan, and so I had some really profound experiences with the Morrigan, and she started to become more and more central to me in my devotional life and my spiritual practice. And eventually, I parted ways with that coven. I have remained, long time friends with them. But from that point on, the Morrigan really kind of like started to become more and more central in my life. And then she started bringing her family along and introducing me to other gods, and kind of from there, like I suppose I will always think of myself as a witch, and witchcraft remains really a central part of my practice, but my religious life came to revolve more around um, the Morrigan and other Gaelic and Celtic deities.
Yeah,
So that's my
I
little
love that.
long-winded story.
No, it's great. Actually, it's pretty short compared to what most people experience. So you condensed it really well.
Yeah.
I love that you separated the witchcraft from the religious
Yeah.
experience, because I think people conflate religion and spirituality and witchcraft and religion, and how we worship often is very different from how we practice magic. And I'm
Yeah, and
glad that you made
witchcraft
that
can
distinction.
coexist with a lot of other religious frameworks, so like there's Catholic witchcraft, there's lots of um ways that those things can align. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. It's interesting that you are gender fluid and a follower of the Morrigan, because I have a student right now in a year-long program of mine who's non-binary
Hmm.
and a devotee of the Morrigan. So I just thought that was an
Okay.
interesting coincidence. So
Yeah, well, she's certainly I feel like she is one of a group of goddesses that certainly is like transgressive of kind of norms of femininity.
yeah.
Um yeah, at least that's how I experience her. Gender and the gods is a complicated topic. Like, to what extent are they truly gendered beings, and to what extent do we need to kind of organize them in that way for our own reasons? I don't know. That's a philosophical question.
Absolutely, because I do a lot of work with spirit possession and oracular
Hmm.
work, and it's not unusual for a gay man to carry a goddess, or for
Hmm.
a woman to carry a god in that work, and so the
Hmm.
gods seem to be pretty fluid in their
Hmm.
gender in ways.
Yeah, I think often they're less worried about it than we are. I mean, I don't want to make any blanket statements, but um Yeah, it's interesting in the Irish mythological context where the Morrigan comes from, there is a lot of gender roles in those stories, and like the early Irish tales and stories. Like there is a lot, and it is certainly comes from a historical context that was pretty focused on cis-normative gender roles.
Yeah.
um but then you have a lot of characters and gods and goddesses that cross those boundaries and break those norms in really interesting ways. And so there's like, to me, it's like a tradition that has a lot of spaciousness around that, and space for creative readings of the myths and creative understandings of the gods.
Yeah, definitely. I love how in talking to so many queer spirit practitioners, people find those spaces in these different traditions, because it seems like every tradition and every mythology has those sort of liminal spaces that queer people seem to just sort of like naturally find and
Yeah,
slot
we
right
find
into.
those. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
definitely.
yeah, definitely. That's great. Um, so tell me a little bit about you're the co-founder of, I'm struggling with pronouncing it, but
Yeah,
Coru
it's the
Cat.
Coru Cathubodua Priesthood. Yes.
Great. So tell me a little bit about that and what you do as part of that.
Yeah, so the priesthood is a Celtic polytheist religious order. We are centrally dedicated to the Morrigan, but we also have kind of a whole family of other um, related Gaelic and Celtic gods. I would say our strongest relationships are with the Morrigan and her sisters, the other war goddesses of Ireland, and Cathubodua, who is a Gaulish war goddess who's also related to them. And so yeah, we're a small initiatory order basically of devotional polytheists.
Okay. And are you primarily concentrated in the Bay Area?
Um, yeah, so the largest number of us are in California, but we do have some people in Seattle, some people in Texas and Georgia, and I hope I'm not leaving anyone out.
Okay.
We have
Okay.
a few
So
scattered people.
okay, so if people are interested, that's something that like they don't have to be in California to connect with your group.
Yeah, so like we are an initiatory order, so we're sort of, for the most part, closed, but we put on some public events and rituals, including online offerings. Like we do some online lore chats, and we have done online devotionals and rituals. And then we have a gathering that we've been hosting every August for just polytheist devotion and community fun
Great.
out here in California. Yeah.
Yeah, wonderful. So you've already got a couple of books and you have another book coming out. So tell us a little bit about the new project.
Yeah. So the new book is called The Magic of the Otherworld. And it is um, it's like a framework for sorcery and magical practice that's rooted in a Celtic worldview and Celtic polytheist kind of approach to magic. Um, so yeah, it has chapters that build from topic to topic. So I try to start with the basics of purification and then spiritual hygiene practices and protection and basic spirit work and how to build alliances, and then from there get into more challenging stuff like curse magic, activism and justice magic, that kind of stuff.
Okay, so activism and magic, that's really interesting that you mentioned that, because I think a lot of people are trying to figure out both how to be activists today. And, I grew up in the era of the AIDS epidemic and ACT UP.
Yeah.
So, I definitely have seen activism done very differently than like, a lot of people lean heavily on Facebook and social media and don't really get involved personally, or they just don't have the training and know how to do that. And then I
Yeah.
also see a lot of spiritual practitioners wanting to help their activism through their magic. So
Yeah.
love to hear some of your thoughts on magic and activism?
Yeah, I am a pretty long-term activist. Like my first time being out at a protest, I think was a anti-war protest against the first Gulf War
Wow.
in
Okay.
in 91 or whatever that was. Um, yeah, so that's been something that has my practice around that has built over the years. And um, gosh, what to say about that? I think that if you want to do magical activism, it's kind of important to be involved in some way in on the ground efforts. I think that, doing some work in like this world, the material world, what some people might call mundane efforts, is important because it helps signal to the spirits and the powers that you're serious. Um, I think it helps ensure that you kind of have skin in the game in the sense.
Yeah.
And that all of that helps power any magical activist work that you want to do. And so to me, they're kind of things that go together. Like I think it's a lot more effective, um, like if you want to do a ritual or a spell to help some kind of, political aim or activist effort, um, that is a lot more effective if you are also engaged in the on the ground work in some way. And that
Yeah.
doesn't have to mean marching in the street or direct action, because like sometimes folks might be better suited to behind the scenes work. They might be better suited to support work. They might be better suited to donating funds. Maybe they aren't physically able to be out on the street doing able-bodied stuff, but like just getting involved in some way for me feels
Yeah.
like it's really important to kind of establishing that you have a stake in it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's so important. And, I always think of like Starhawk, who's been arrested, what, how many times? I mean, it's
Yeah.
we've probably all lost count by now, but just has always been a lifelong activist and right there on the front lines. But, um, and I think that we live in an era of sort of lazy activism right now. People like
Mm-hmm.
consider it activists to just hit share or like on that meme on Facebook, but that doesn't really create any change. You've got to kind of
Yeah,
get
I think
up
there is
and
a
do
difference
more.
between like awareness raising and activism. Those are two
Yeah.
both of those are important things and we need them both. And, around some of the anarchist and protest oriented, circles that I rub shoulders with, people talk about diversity of tactics
Hmm.
and that we need everything. All these different modes of impact, from awareness raising and educating and creating political art that shares a message, and legislative work and letter writing and peaceful protest and less peaceful protest and direct action, and all these things are really important.
Yeah. So you mentioned political action, and right now, as queer people in the US, it feels like we're very much under attack.
Yeah.
And I hear from
Yeah.
a lot of people frustration with it because the way the system is set up, it feels like rural people and minorities have a stronger voice than like the urban people and the majority views on things like gun rights and LGBTQ rights and all of these issues that
Yeah.
are really important today. So what can queer people do if to feel like they're being heard? Because I know I write to my representatives all the time, but here in Ohio they kind of like probably file for a team. So
Yeah. Gosh, that's a big question. What can queer people to do to be heard? um, I myself, I don't consider myself an organizer in terms
mhm.
of activism. I'm somebody that like tries to show up and support actions that are being organized by others. Um, so, I'm not sure I'm the right person to say, here's what you should do, to be
Yeah.
heard in this climate of anti-queer stuff. But I guess what I would say is what I have found is really effective is when it disrupts the status quo.
Yes.
You know,
Yes.
like actions that can be dismissed will be dismissed by the power structure.
Yes.
And so, I mean, I guess this is the radical in me. Like, um, I think, you know, but we are at a stage where we have to disrupt.
Yeah.
And I guess, you know, the thing is that to get involved in activism that truly challenges things and truly forces itself to be heard, you have to be working within groups of mutual trust. Right. And so like
Yeah.
that is about seeking out who is working on this issue in your area, who's trusted by people in your,
Yeah.
you know, community. Um and you know, showing up and demonstrating that you're somebody that's willing to do the work and can be trusted. There's something else I was going to say about that. There are some forms of online activism that I sometimes see that have an effect. You know, it's things like, you know, when they do something like, you know, creating a snitch form that they want, you know, people to use to snitch on other, you know, to
Yeah.
target you know, oppressed people or whatever, and then people will bomb the form with fake information to the point where it can't be used. There are some like mass forms of activism like that can be helpful, but I don't know. I suppose that I'm more experienced with and more aware of the like direct action protest kind of
Yeah.
space, and so, you know, more of my experiences are rooted there, and that's really just about like developing relationships of trust with networks of people around you,
Yeah.
which, you
Okay.
know, those networks and those relationships of trust, you know, also can become mutual aid, and this how we support each other and how we survive together, not just how we oppose, you know, the forces that
Yeah.
threaten us, but also how we care for each other.
Yeah, definitely. Sort of finding your group.
Yeah,
You know, I hate to use tribe sometimes because it feels like an appropriation for me to use that,
right.
but yeah, like your
Finding your
community.
folks.
Yeah,
Yeah.
finding your folks. You know, I use the word kin a lot to kind of
Mm-hmm.
cover that. So
Yeah.
finding those people that not only are there to protest and work with you, but also kind of support you, encourage you, inspire you, all of those things that are really important. And that, and I think part of the problem with the reason we don't see the kind of activism that we saw like during the AIDS epidemic is that there's been sort of a deterioration in community involvement, and people don't have those groups anymore. And I think people need to find those groups for sure. So have you been arrested?
I have not. I have volunteered for actions where, you know, sometimes it'll be like, if you're willing to risk arrest, we're going to do this. Who feels able to volunteer for that? So I have volunteered for that kind of thing a couple of times, but it turned out to not lead to arrests. I have not actually been
Yeah.
arrested in that kind of a situation.
Okay, great. Wonderful.
But, you know,
So,
just to return to something you mentioned about like finding your people, it reminded me that one of the things that I find really powerful on the spiritual side of things is to recall that for every struggle or kind of experience that we have to deal with, there are ancestors of that struggle, right? Like
yeah.
whatever we're facing, whatever our kind of lived experiences are, there are ancestors of that. So there are queer ancestors, there are ancestors
Yes.
of revolution, there are, you know, ancestors to every aspect of who we are, and they are there to support us. And, you know, when we are facing these conflicts and these risks, they can be a huge help.
Yeah, I'm so glad that you went there with the ancestors thing, because we just had Ben Stimson on and talking about ancestor veneration.
Yeah.
And and of course, I'm running the Samhain retreat, focusing on queer ancestors. So I'm glad that you brought that up. Um, so working magic for activism, like
Mm-hmm.
tell us a little bit about what are some of the ethical concerns and what are some of the best ways that people can support activism through their spirituality and through their witchcraft.
Yeah. So one of the, I suppose, like when you're thinking of ethical concerns, something that comes up is like the issue of white knighting.
Yeah,
You'll sometimes see activist efforts being shared around, like magical activist efforts, like join this group spell or whatever, this group working. And it's important that that work is um led by or done in such a way as it centers the actual needs of the most impacted people.
yeah,
Because otherwise it can be really counterproductive. Um, the other thing that I would say is like just as a safety consideration that is important to keep in mind is that power structures have egregores or they have kind of a spiritual reality to them. And this is true even when, we're talking about institutions that are like nominally not magical,
yeah,
like the government or the police or whatever, um, the judicial system, like nominally not magical systems, but the power that flows through them
yeah,
and the power that they wield in the world has a spiritual reality to it as well. And that means that when you try to act against those forces, you kind of really have to be prepared for what they can wield. And
yeah,
so it's important to have magical backup and protection and a like deep rank of spirit allies that you can call on. And like I I like to say, like, roll deep, as a magical activist, you don't want to do this alone.
yeah,
um and those protections are really important. Like I think that just in general, like there's an ethos that I see in a lot of pagan circles, um, that is sort of like, who needs magical protection? Because we believe in, we're I don't know, maybe nature worshipers and everything is sacred. So why would I need to be protected from that? But like there's a lot of things that can harm you.
yes, yeah,
And when you're
absolutely.
involved in magical activism, you are kind of choosing to confront things that can bring harm. And so those protections are really important.
Yeah, I'm so glad that you mentioned that because sometimes, particularly in pagan circles, there's a sort of Pollyanna attitude towards magic and
Mm,
magical reality, and
yeah.
that can definitely come back to bite you. So, yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's true.
yeah, definitely, definitely. So it's going to sound a little weird, but just something that's kind of on my mind as we're talking about this. And so I don't know if you read John Beckett on is it
Yeah.
Patheos? Yeah.
Sometimes. Yeah.
Yeah, so there's been some stuff about sort of, a war brewing in the other world with Morrigan and changes that are happening. So just curious what your thoughts on that are.
Yeah. Um, I definitely have heard people talk about a war or some sort of conflict happening in the other world. Um, my experience of that is maybe a little different. Like what something that I have in common with folks like John Beckett is, many people starting between, 10 to 15 years ago or so, started getting these persistent messages from the Morrigan and, in some people's cases from other deities that they were working with. But in my case, I'm closest to the Morrigan and starting in about 2010, 2011, we started hearing these messages like she kept saying, a storm is coming.
Yeah.
Get ready, a storm is coming.
Yeah.
um, and I heard those messages and when I started becoming more visible as, a priestess of the Morrigan, I started getting emails from people
Yeah.
randomly that were saying, she's telling me this, what does it mean? And that seems to have been a big sort of wave of information that gods like her were trying to convey to people. That went on for, a number of years, and then the message is kind of shifted to the storm is here, like
Yeah.
this is happening, you have a role to play, be in the fight.
Hmm. Yeah.
And I really see that as my interpretation of that phenomenon is that it's reflective of the fact that we are sort of in the midst of a worldwide resurgence of fascism and
Yes.
authoritarianism. And
Yeah.
also with climate change and the realities of struggle that brings with it. And those two things are interlinked, in
Yes.
part of the resurgence of authoritarianism is coming from people who know um the changes, they recognize that changes are coming, and they basically only want to take care of their own.
Yeah. Yeah.
um
Absolutely. Yeah.
yeah, so I think that like the gods have been very cognizant, and they saw this coming. And for me, that's kind of the big struggle, that's the big picture that we are in the midst of, and it is reflected in the other world, in the
Yeah.
spirit world. I think that there's a lot of chaos that spills over.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, definitely. And I've heard messages like this from the gods myself for some
Hmm.
time, so very
Yeah.
familiar with it. Yeah, but yeah. And it definitely, we are kind of in a midst where it feels like a battle for sort of the soul of our nation in a way. Like who are we going to be as a people? Are we going to be people who, dislike people who are different from us and don't help people like refugees and things like that, or are we going to be the people that are there and open and willing to help when help is needed? And it
Yeah.
feels like a definite struggle around that.
Yeah. I mean, I definitely think that like there, there's there's a sense of like an unveiling and a dropping of illusions, and or I think we have an opportunity, I guess is what I should say. We have an opportunity to really confront who we are, and
Yeah.
particularly for the United States, what we've been, which has never been a place of freedom for everyone, or a place of liberty for everyone. And like we have to fight to become that,
Yeah.
if that's what we care about, because it's not something we've ever had.
Right. Right. And part of that is admitting that we've never had that, which is
Yeah.
what's so hard for some people.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. So yeah. um Kind of circling back to like how all of this relates to queer people, because definitely it feels like
Hmm.
queer people are under a lot of attack. what
Yeah.
what's sort of your message to the queer community of what should they be focusing on right now, or what's sort of your message that you'd want to send to the queer community?
Gosh. Well, I think one thing that I find helpful and strengthening and nourishing is to remember that we've always been here,
Yeah.
right? Like as far back as you can look, there have been queer people and gender variant people. Like we are part of the soul of humanity, and
Yeah.
we've always been here, and we always will be here. Like they cannot eradicate us.
Right.
It's not a thing, like as much as it can feel really terrifying to think about this like wave of anti-queer, anti-trans, like some of it quite genocidal, these, attempts to like legislate people out of existence and out of the public sphere. That's really terrifying to contemplate. But also I find it really helpful to kind of re-ground myself in the knowledge that we've always been here, we always will be here.
Yeah.
Every generation, more queer people are born. We cannot be eradicated because we are just part of human diversity.
Yeah.
And, that's not necessarily a guide for action, but for me, it feels like it's nourishing and restorative to remember that.
Yeah, absolutely. It's very affirming to
Mm-hmm.
realize, we've always been here. You're not an anomaly or something that could just be erased because we have
Yeah.
always been here and always will be. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I definitely see that as something that could be very inspiring and validating and affirming. So thank you for that.
Yeah.
So your book, The Magic of the Otherworld, about magic and activism, and when does it come out?
It is already landing at bookstores
Okay.
and some people's pre-orders are arriving, but the official release date is Saturday.
Okay. So by the time this goes to press,
Yeah.
it will be out. So definitely go to your preferably independent bookstore
Yeah.
and get The Magic of the Otherworld. Okay, great. Great.
Yeah.
So as we're winding down on our time here, I always like to ask, is there anything that you wanted to say to listeners that we didn't get a chance to cover yet?
Gosh. I suppose like something that occurs to me is that I think that queer spirituality and kind of coming into yourself, um, a lot of it is learning to trust your instincts. And also, that has been true for me as a polytheist too, because
Yeah.
we live inside of a dominant overculture that wants to kind of constantly gaslight us about spiritual realities, right? Because
Yeah.
like the belief system that we live within is this culture that believes that, spiritual realities don't exist, or if they do, it's only within this kind of monotheistic world. And so whatever you're experiencing of the spirit world, of the gods, of, magic is not real. And so we are sort of constantly receiving this message that you're imagining it. It's not
Yeah.
real. And that's a kind of cultural gaslighting. And I think it for queer people is also potentially kind of cumulative with the kind of gaslighting we have about our queer experiences, like when you're discovering your queerness, your gender identity, your sexuality, it's a lot of that's not that's not how you're supposed to be, that's not real, what you're experiencing isn't the correct way to be. And so it's
It's a
like a
phase.
cumulative, like,
Yeah.
yeah, it's a phase.
Yeah.
All these messages are basically like just different kinds of gaslighting. And so like to live within that and resist it, you have to be willing to trust yourself and trust your own experiences and allow them to stand, to allow them to have to be understood as knowledge, you know.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
think that's been helpful to me both as a queer person and as a spirit practitioner.
Yeah, I'm glad that you brought that up because that gaslighting around spirituality not being real and the experiences not being real, it also sort of serves to pigeonhole queer people in the only correct spirituality for you is this one that rejects who you are at your
Mm-hmm.
core, which of course is why so many queer people end up rejecting all spirituality because
Yeah.
they don't know that there are other ways to explore their spirituality
Yeah,
and
and
that
if
yeah.
your experience of religion always involved a lot of, moralistic psychological brutality,
Yeah. Yeah.
then yeah, let's, who wants that?
Yeah, exactly. And so, we don't know early on that, hey, there's all other ways to experience spirituality. There's other ways to experience the gods. that there's more than one even
Yeah.
that you can
I mean, I
experience.
like to I like
Yeah.
to say, and this is another one of my touchstones, is
Yeah.
returning to this idea that, like, if you look at the breadth and the depth of human history,
Yeah.
most cultures in most places and most times on this planet have understood that there is a spirit world.
Yes.
There are non-physical realities that, these things exist and we can interact with them and they inform part of the human experience. And these cultures like the one we're living in now, that is very like materialistic, spiritual realities don't exist, that kind of thing. It's a tiny anomaly in history.
Yeah. Yeah. It's
And
also an
even inside of that, you can scratch the surface of any atheistic or monotheistic culture and you will find folk magic happening even inside of it.
Yes.
So this is
Yeah.
another one of these things that's just part of who humans are, and it will
Yeah.
always re-emerge.
Yeah, absolutely. I think even monotheism is kind of a blip in the history, really. If you really look at all the cultures over all of
Yeah.
human history, it's a blip.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah.
And
Yeah.
many monotheisms are not quite as monotheistic as the label on the tin implies.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because Christianity really fits more of a dualism than a monotheism anyway. So yeah. Yeah. So yeah, I definitely love that idea of being gaslighted by the society. I do human design, and human design is all about deconditioning all of those like
Mm.
social expectations and things to be who you are authentically.
Mm-hmm.
So it resonates very strongly with me. Um, any parting thoughts or words of wisdom for our listeners?
I mean, I suppose that sort of was my parting thought.
Okay.
um, be gay, do crime.
Be gay, do crime. I love it. I love it. I'm gonna
Be
gonna make
wild,
that a
be
I'm gonna make that as a
ungovernable.
gonna make that a quote post on my Instagram and like attribute it to you. Be gay, do crime.
be be difficult to erase, and
Yeah. 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 Be
be
loud, be
proud.
seen.
Yeah.
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 Love it. Love it. So your website is bansheearts.com and people
Yeah.
can get in touch with you. Do you have any social handles you want to promote?
Yeah, so I'm Morpheus Ravenna on most of the social medias, Instagram, Facebook, Tumblr, stuff like that. Um and then I have a second Instagram for my tattoo portfolio that's under Banshee Arts.
Okay,
But you
great.
can find it
Wonderful.
all if you just go to my website. If you go to bansheearts.com, you can find me there.
Okay, great. And we will definitely include the link down below, as well as the names of your books and where to get them and all of that good stuff. So thank you so much for joining me today. This has been a really great conversation, and it certainly gave me a lot to think about as well around activism and magic and all of it, really. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Yeah, it's been a pleasure. It's great talking with you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Queer Spirituality Podcast. But before I go, I want to tell you about a very special retreat that I'm running this October. It's called the Sacred Ken Samhain, and Samhain is the traditional time in pagan and witchcraft in which we honor our ancestors. And so if you've been looking for an opportunity to get together in queer sacred space over a 3-day weekend and honor our queer spirit ancestors, all of those people who have gone before us and made strides for our equality, this is an opportunity that you won't want to miss. The Sacred Ken process is also a process that I've developed involving workshops and exercises to really create a stronger, more tightly knit and supportive, loving community among gay and bi men. This is going to be a fantastic weekend full of deep conversations, rituals, drumming, dancing, bonfires, nature walks, everything that you could possibly want in a queer spiritual retreat. So go check it out. If you go to my website, queerspirituality.net, you'll find it linked right on the homepage. You can get all the details there. There's a payment plan. So if you can't register all at once, you can make payments between now and October, and there's no additional fees or interest to do that. It's something I offer just because I know that sometimes it makes it more manageable for people. Also, for listeners of this podcast, I have a very special offer. If you register with the code podcast2023, you will get $50 off of your registration. So that's my gift to my listeners for registering for the Sacred Kin Samhain weekend retreat. So go out there, check it out, queerspirituality.net, and register today because spaces are filling up. Hope to see you there. Bright blessings. Thank you for listening. This has been the Queer Spirituality Podcast with Julian Crosson-Hill. If you enjoyed this show, please consider leaving a rating on whatever site you get your podcasts at. Rating the show allows other people to discover it and be exposed to these ideas around queer spirituality. You can also find my blog and past episodes of this podcast at www.queerspirituality.net. That's www.queerspirituality.net. You can also there find links to the Queer Spirituality Facebook group, my various social channels where you can get involved in the discussion or send me your feedback or questions or things you'd like to hear on the show. Thank you again for listening and for your support. Bright blessings.